I was 16 when my friends and I spent the weekend at Emma's countryside house. The house had been in her family for decades, tall, narrow, with peeling white paint and a slanted roof that creaked in the wind. The hallways were dim even during the day, the kind of place where you always felt watched. On our second night there, a thunderstorm was rolling in, the sky flashing pale blue every few minutes. We sat in a circle on the living room floor playing Truth or Dare, with the wind outside rattling the window panes. Every dare already felt more serious in that house, like the walls were listening. When my turn came, Josh smirked and said, "I dare you," to spend 5 minutes in the attic, alone. I laughed at first, but the attic door was infamous among Emma's friends. It was a narrow wooden door at the end of the upstairs hallway, so short you had to duck to enter. Emma said no one used it because the floorboards were too weak, but there was something in her tone that sounded off, as if she didn't quite believe it herself. I didn't want to look scared, so I grabbed the flashlight and headed upstairs. The old house moaned with every step as I climbed. When I reached the door, the air was cooler there, like the temperature dropped just outside the attic. I twisted the handle. It wasn't locked, but it felt strangely heavy, as if something on the other side was leaning against it. When it finally swung open, the smell of dust, old paper, and faint metal drifted out. The beam of my flashlight cut through the shadows. The attic was full of covered furniture and stacks of boxes, all blanketed with cobwebs. The roof angled low, so I had to crouch in some places. In the farthest corner stood an old wooden chair, not facing into the room, but turned toward the wall beneath a small circular window. Its back legs dug slightly into the dust, like it had been dragged there a long time ago. Trying to act brave, I walked over and sat on the chair. The wooden seat groaned under my weight. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from behind the wall the chair was facing. I held my breath, straining to listen. It wasn't random scratching, more like writing, scrape, pause, scrape, scrape, as if someone was carving letters on the other side. A sudden gust rattled the attic window, and my flashlight flickered. When the light steadied again, I nearly dropped it. The chair had shifted. I swear it was now angled slightly toward me instead of facing the wall. I shot to my feet, heart hammering. In the dust beneath the chair was a long, thin line that hadn't been there before, stretching from the wall toward where my feet had been, as if something had been dragged out. I backed away, eyes fixed on the chair, then grabbed the attic door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked harder. Behind me, the scratching stopped. For a long moment there was only silence, then the floorboards behind the chair creaked softly, as though someone had stepped forward. I started shouting for my friends. I could hear them faintly through the door, laughing, thinking I was just trying to scare them. Then the laughter stopped all at once. I pounded on the door. Suddenly it swung open. Emma stood there, pale, saying she'd heard knocking but no shouting at all. When we went back to the attic together later, the chair was back where it had been. But now, carved faintly into the wall it faced were new words that hadn't been there before. Sit still. Don't turn around. We left that door closed for the rest of the weekend. Every summer my cousins and I spent 2 weeks at our grandparents' small cabin by a forest lake. In the daylight it was postcard perfect. Silver water, pine trees, the smell of campfire smoke. At night, however, the lake turned into an endless sheet of black glass. The forest grew strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. One humid August night we sat on the porch steps playing Truth or Dare beneath a sky full of stars. The lake reflected the moonlight in a rippling silver path stretching from the dock to the far shore. The air carried the damp smell of pine needles and water. At first, our dares were harmless, singing loudly into the woods, eating a burnt marshmallow. Then my cousin Tyler dared my older brother to walk to the very end of the dock and whistle at the lake 3 times. My brother grinned, took the dare, and strolled down the dock boards that creaked over the water. We watched him raise 2 fingers to his lips and whistle, 3 sharp notes that echoed off the lake's surface. The laughter on the porch died instantly when, a heartbeat later, 3 answering whistles drifted back across the lake. They were softer, slower, drawn out. We peered at the opposite shore but saw nothing, no cabin lights, no boats, only dense tree line. Trying to shrug it off, we kept playing. When my turn came, Tyler dared me to fetch the old kerosene lantern from the rickety boathouse by the shore. The boathouse always unsettled me. Its wooden door hung crooked, never fully closing. The inside smelled of damp rope and lake mud. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the gravel slope alone. Halfway there, I heard the faint crunch of footsteps behind me. I spun around. No one was there. The crickets had gone silent. Inside the boathouse, the lantern wasn't hanging on its usual hook. Instead, it sat upright on the floor, and to my surprise, a weak amber glow flickered inside it, even though it hadn't been lit in years. A trail of wet, muddy footprints led away from the lantern across the floorboards, down the steps and into the water, where they vanished beneath the black lake surface. The air felt suddenly heavier. I picked up the lantern and hurried out. The lake was still as glass, yet faint circular ripples spread outward from the center as if something had just sunk. Halfway back up the slope, the night air carried a sound that stopped me cold. 3 long, low whistles rising from somewhere near the boathouse. I sprinted to the porch, clutching the lantern. All of us sat frozen, staring toward the dark tree line. The only movement was the silver shimmer of the moon on the water. We locked the cabin door and whispered for an hour, pretending it was probably an echo. But at sunrise we went outside and found something worse. A new set of wet, muddy footprints led from the dock halfway up the slope, and then simply stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. I'm not someone who usually gets spooked easily. I grew up watching horror movies with my cousins late at night, and I thought I'd seen it all. But that was before last year's camping trip. The one where a harmless game of truth or dare made me question whether we were truly alone out there. It was early autumn, and my friend group decided to have one last weekend adventure before the weather got too cold. There were 7 of us in total: me, my best friend Jamie, 2 other friends, Hannah and Ryan, plus 3 others I didn't know as well, friends of friends. We weren't exactly a tight-knit group, but everyone seemed excited for a couple of days in the woods. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The park wasn't too far from town, but once you passed the last gas station, you lost cell service. That was part of the appeal. No distractions, no notifications, just nature. The campsite was tucked near a lake, surrounded by tall pines that swayed in the wind, their needles whispering whenever a breeze passed through. By the time we pitched the tents and gathered wood for the fire, the sun had already begun to sink behind the tree line. The lake turned into a sheet of dark glass, perfectly still, reflecting the fading sky. There was something peaceful about it, at least at first. That night after dinner, someone suggested playing Truth or Dare. It was one of those traditions you couldn't avoid, especially with a group that didn't know each other well, an icebreaker disguised as a game. We circled up around the campfire, the flames crackling and throwing distorted shadows across everyone's faces. The first few rounds were harmless. Silly dares like sing your favorite song out loud, or run to the lake and back barefoot. The truths were the usual embarrassing questions. Everyone laughed, the fire burned lower, and for a while, it felt like the perfect camping night. But as the fire died down and the woods grew darker, the tone of the game started to shift. It was Ryan's turn. He smirked and said, "Dare, make it good." Jamie grinned and thought for a moment. "All right. I dare you to knock on the door of that old cabin across the lake." We all froze. The cabin wasn't technically part of our campsite. It sat about 50 yards across the water, half hidden in the trees. We'd noticed it earlier when we arrived, its roof sagging and its windows covered in grime. It looked abandoned, but no one had wanted to get close enough to check. Ryan laughed. "That place? What if there's some guy living in there? Then he'll tell you to go away, Jamie teased. It's just a cabin. Don't tell me you're scared. Ryan grabbed the flashlight and headed off, pretending to be braver than he was. We all leaned forward, watching the shaky beam of light bob as he crossed the narrow wooden bridge over the water. The woods on the other side looked darker somehow, the trees denser, as if the shadows themselves were waiting for him. When Ryan reached the cabin, he hesitated for a moment, then rapped 3 times on the door. The sound was faint but audible across the lake, 3 hollow knocks that seemed to echo much longer than they should have. A hush fell over our group. Ryan turned and started to walk back, but then he stopped. We saw his flashlight flicker across one of the cabin's windows. "What's he doing?" Hannah whispered. Ryan slowly backed up toward the door again. The beam of his flashlight shook as if his hands were trembling. Then, suddenly he ran across the bridge without looking back, nearly tripping over a loose plank. When he got back, his face was pale. "Did you guys see that?" he asked, his voice lower than before. "See what?" Jamie asked, half laughing. Ryan looked back over his shoulder toward the cabin. There was someone at the window. "I swear, I saw a face looking back at me." Everyone went quiet. I tried to reason with him, maybe it was his reflection, or just a trick of the light, but Ryan was adamant. He wouldn't joke about something like that. We decided to end the game and turn in for the night, but no one slept well. The forest outside felt too quiet, as if the usual chorus of crickets and frogs had hushed themselves. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of water lapping gently against the shore. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard the faint creak of the wooden bridge. Someone or something was crossing it. I held my breath and listened. The creaking stopped, and for a long while, there was only silence. I told myself it was my imagination and eventually drifted back to a light, uneasy sleep. The next morning, we all avoided talking about what had happened. Ryan looked exhausted, saying he'd heard footsteps outside his tent during the night, but hadn't dared to check. Later that day, we decided to hike one of the trails that looped around the lake. When we passed the cabin in daylight, it didn't look any less unsettling. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, and the windows were so dirty you couldn't see inside. But here is the thing. When we walked past the window Ryan had pointed out the night before, there was a handprint on the inside of the glass. It wasn't dusty like the rest of the window. It was clear, as if someone had pressed their palm there recently. None of us wanted to admit what we saw. We hurried past and tried to focus on the trail. That night, we agreed not to play any more games. We stayed close to the fire until it burned out completely and turned in early, though none of us truly slept. Every rustle in the trees, every snap of a twig in the darkness, felt like something or someone was moving just beyond the edge of the firelight. When morning came, we packed up quickly. As we drove away, I glanced back at the lake one last time. The cabin was still there, of course, but standing in front of it just for a second, before the trees blocked my view, I could have sworn I saw a figure. Tall, still, watching us leave. We never talked about that trip again. And I don't think any of us will ever play truth or dare in the woods again, no matter how harmless it seems.